Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we're going to make my custom platform crane. As you may or may not know, before I got started with this whole custom fabrication business and then CNCKing.com, I actually spent almost 10 years of my life designing kids' toys using plywood. This is one of those projects here, and I actually cut this out I think 7 or 8 years ago. And I recently, Simon came to the shop, my son, and he was looking for something to play with, and I gave him this. It just happened to be on the shelf. And since then, he just loves playing with it all the time. So I thought, okay, well, what we'll do is I'll release the kit on CNCKing.com. So if you have a kid, they can also have their own custom wooden crane. Now, what makes this crane fun for Simon, at least, is that it has a very strong base. So it's not something that's going to tip over like a lot of toys that he has that do have that problem. It's very simple mechanics. This turns around. This goes up and down, and he's got 2 levers here. So one is like a reel. It brings in the hook, and the other one actually brings this up. So you can basically move around all 3 different axes on it. It's relatively straightforward for it to catch on, to pick stuff up. Again, the hook is not meant to be, a serious hook, but he hooks up a lot of his toys with it, and it just grabs stuff and moves stuff around. He just loves it. So I thought, it looks like a fun project for him, and it'll be a fun project to have on the website too. So when I was younger, before I started this whole 3D business, making kids' toys, I actually ran a 3D industrial animation studio back in '96. So before most people even knew what 3D animation was. So I had to teach myself how to do this kind of stuff. And back then the software was rather crude compared to what I have access now, but it worked. And when it came to me deciding I wanted to get into woodworking, I was living in a little apartment in Korea, South Korea, and I wanted to get into woodworking, but I didn't have access to any woodworking tools or anything like that. But I wanted to make little toys. So I realized that I could use my 3D animation sort of prowess, and using that, actually design and fabricate toys virtually. And that's what I did with CNCKing.com. If you go to that website, it's still there. You can see me showing all these cool toys that I designed. That led to me to actually self-writing and publishing my books, showing people how to do this kind of stuff. And then eventually over the years, I ended up acquiring machines that actually fabricate every aspect of this. But what I want you to keep in mind is when it comes to 3D animation, what I'm actually doing is simulating the actual toy. And that's important because it tells me right away if a piece will fit or not fit, just visually. If something doesn't fit, that doesn't work. You just modify the design and you continue on. So it's a way of verifying the final design before actually fabricating the final design. Whenever I custom design something, for me, I taught myself. So I'm entirely self-taught animation, design, fabrication, everything. I never took a course in laser cutting, nor CNC routering, or plasma cutting, or water jet cutting, or whatever. I just taught myself. You buy the machines and you figure it out, and that's how I've been going through life as a custom fabricator. Now for this here, I just gave it to Simon, and he figured out how it worked, and that's a great way for him to learn. Now, the way I design these things is actually different because I never went to school for any of this. I actually thought of designing stuff based on the material thickness. So it's non-parametric. What that means is if this plywood here is thicker, well then the overall model will be thicker by the same proportion. And if it's thinner, the same thing goes down by the same proportion. Now you might think that's kind of odd, but it's actually a really good way to design stuff. That's not, I'm not building space shuttles to go out into outer space or anything like that. So the nice approach to that is that all I have to do is measure the thickness of the material I'm about to cut, and everything scales perfectly. Now, if you just have pieces like 2D pieces and that kind of stuff, it's no problem. But when you have something like this here with lots of interlocking parts, it quickly becomes a headache if you're doing something at a different thickness, because then all the little slots, nothing fits anymore. So that's why I thought of the approach of, if my baseline is material thickness, then everything on that model will work perfectly regardless of scale. as long as I have the same material thickness, throughout the material. And it works out great. The other nice thing about using plywood is plywood is never totally flat. Now you might think that's a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing for these kind of models. Because what it does is it allows me to cut a little bit more give into the model, but because the model will warp a little bit, or not the model, the plywood in this case here will warp a little bit, it actually strengthens the model along with glue. So it adds a little bit more extra friction and a little bit more tightness that would not be there otherwise. Then you throw on some glue and maybe some paint, and everything sort of holds really, really well. Now, of course, the top here, as you saw in the animation, comes right off. And this is actually a small little approach that when I came to designing this, it took me a while to figure out. Because you gotta remember, I did all this stuff here before I knew these machines even existed. I just designed stuff in my head and I thought about how it would be cut, and that's how I ended up designing my stuff to work. So basically you just have a round disc here. And this is loose. And this holds it there. And as a result, this can spin really, really nice. Now again, I'm not lifting cars with this. I'm not doing anything crazy. So that's why my initial approach for designing kids' toys actually worked out really well in hindsight, because you could be a little flimsy, you could be a little loose on a lot of things, and still have a really good model for kids to play with. So I actually cut this when I first got my laser many, many years ago. So maybe, I think 7 or 8 years ago, based on the date of this video. And I didn't feel like cutting another one because I don't need to. I already have the model. And that's the nice thing about these kind of models is they don't age. 100 years from now when you have a laser, even my great-great-great-grandson will be able to cut these models out. And they'll look just as good, well into the future as they do now. And that's the nice thing about it. Plywood is plywood. That's not going to change anytime soon. Material qualities and quantities might change, but you can always switch around. And that's the nice thing about CNC machines is they never get tired too. So if I had to do 100 of these or one of these, it's not a problem. And the other nice thing about using a CNC machine is you get rid of sort of the artisanal aspect of it. So you don't have to spend hours and years of your life learning how to carve something out. You just download the file, or in this case, make the file yourself, and you press a button and the machine cuts it out. That's the easy part of all these models. So another approach that I took towards teaching myself how to design stuff is one that I didn't take too seriously at the beginning, but as my models get more and more complicated, I started realizing that if you have 50 different pieces that all look the same, you're gonna have a big headache trying to put it together. And I realized that when I started assembling my models, when I got a ShopBot desktop, and I started building the models, I go, hang on a second, this piece looks a lot like this piece, and how do I know which one goes into the right spot? Because if I put the wrong one in with glue, something's not gonna work. So that's where having unique pieces comes into hand. So for instance, here you can see this one here is all one piece. It'd definitely be easier and more cost effective and so forth to have each one of these legs is a separate piece and then the top is a separate piece, and you get a lot of efficiencies that way. But the headache is when you try to assemble it, it becomes just a massive headache. So this way here, this piece here goes this way. This one here literally cannot fit there because you can see how it goes downwards, and this one goes upwards to form the bottom structure. The base, you have 2 different sizes. It's easy to make them 2 same sizes, but by having a stagger, which piece goes on to the other one intuitively. And it goes so forth and so and so on for these kind of things. And another thing to keep in mind is, again, when you're making toys, specifically in my case, you want to make something's pretty obvious. So let's just take this off here. So you can see at the top, I had another problem where I don't want these two to be the same, because if they're the same length, you have a problem where they bang into each other. Especially for a child, they have little fingers, and this one. So it's obvious that this one here, the big one, controls this here, and the little one controls how much it gets brought into. So again, it's just a lot of different little details that you sort of come up with designing stuff. I definitely didn't start off this way. I started off with very, very simple models. And then as I did more and more of it, I added more complexity, but also more thought into how it actually be used in the real life. So again, I assembled this model years ago, and it still works totally fine to this day. Simon loves playing with it, but basically this is how I started off cutting out all these models. Now back then when I just did these things virtually, I actually had a network of friends who had laser machines, because back then it was a pretty rare thing to have the equipment I have in the shop here. It'd be pretty rare to have in a small business such as mine. And so what I would do is I'd do the model here, I'd do the 3D animation, verify it, and then I'd send it off to buddies who had lasers. And they're more than happy to cut this out and give me back some feedback. Maybe you should change this, maybe you should change that. And it worked really well. That's what I did for many, many years. These machines are not cheap. They have not gotten cheaper over time. The capabilities keep increasing, but that's commensurate with the price of the machines as well. So when it comes to assembling these models, it's a pretty straightforward project and process. But again, the reason why it is that way is because of the unique pieces. If you don't have unique pieces, this stuff is an absolute nightmare. And I know that because that's how I realized that you don't want to build or design that way. So if you want a kit like this here, I just sell the kits. I'm not doing too much assembly. I think it's like Lego. It's fun getting a kit where you put it together yourself. You have sort of more pride in it and that kind of stuff, rather than something you already built and you just dump it on your kid. At least that's my thought about it, at least. Now in this case here, so you can get this model right now on sandboxranch.com, and you'll notice something regarding the size of the overall model. You'll notice that I added a tolerance of 10 to 15%. It was actually really large in the custom fabrication world, but I think for kids, 10 to 15% larger or smaller, which is almost a 30% sort of grade, is rather large. And the reason for that goes back to the material thickness. Now in this case here, this is 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters thick plywood. But the problem with plywood is it's never the thickness that you order it at, and it actually changes thickness throughout the year. So if you have a lot of humidity in the air, it gets thicker. If things get very, very dry, it would actually get thinner by 10 to 15%, both ways. And that's why when you buy the model, or you buy the kit that has all the pieces that you make into the model, there is that variation there. Now there's not much variation in size when it's assembled. That's something to keep in mind. So it's not like this model will grow 15% larger and shrink 15% based on the seasons, because now you have a finished product that's glued together and it's held together. What happens is the actual thickness of the material, once assembled, it's pretty much static. Everything sort of holds everything together. And you might be a little bit more give here and there every once in a while, but again, you applied glue and it holds everything properly and actually keeps dimensional stability. So that's why there's that variation on the website. So it's not like you buy a traditional toy where they'll say it's exactly, 10 inches by 4 inches, and it's exactly that. This is not manufactured. This is actually cut out using real material, and that's why you have that variation. So looking for custom kits or anything else you have in mind, head over to sandboxranch.com. We'll cut it for you and ship it right to your door.